You seem so...
Cynical. True. That's part of my fascination. I do hateful things for which people love me, and I do lovable things for which they hate me. I'm admired for my detestability. Now, don't worry, little Eva. I may be rancid butter, but I'm on your side of the bread.
Thanks for the setup, Mr. Hornbeck. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Almost 3 months ago, I released a video entitled Iron Mace, This is the Way, the central purpose of which was a call to action and to lay out a guide path which the Iron Mace development or executive team could follow to break free of this cycle of 1 step forward, 2 steps back, a cycle which has plagued this young team since the nascent days of early playtests. The video was well-intentioned and generally well-received. I think that if there's one thing we as a community can agree on, it's that we want this game and this team to succeed. In that video, I also volunteered my time as a technology professional with decades of experience bringing innovative software products to market to help in any way I could. Sadly, I was not taken up on that offer, but I think anyone can understand why. I am over 12,000 kilometers away from their office. I'm separated by an ocean, the international date line, and a common language. But regardless, this is the follow-up from that conversation I started several months ago. Much like you, dear viewer, I feel passionately about this project. I remain in awe of Dark and Darker's potential, and it hurts. It hurts to think about the potential being squandered. This video is essentially a strategic level discussion on and around the development progress of Dark and Darker. I can't be any more clear on this point. I am not affiliated with Iron Mace in any way. To say it again, I am not engaged or affiliated with Iron Mace in any way. I do not have any more information than you do, dear viewer. This is supposition and speculation by myself, solely informed by over 2 decades of working in technology. Last caveat, I'm likely going to trigger a few people here, so this is your warning in advance. For those of you without significant experience in the boardroom, I may sound a little bit like a jerk. I've made multiple passes at this, and I can't find a way to talk about some of these issues without being direct. Now, reasonable people in the comments can disagree about to what extent I'm being a jerk here, but let me assure you this. This will be direct, it will be moderately technical, but it will provide critical feedback lacking in any nuance. Try to think about this conversation as tough love, because that's the place it's coming from. But, as is tradition in my profession, let's talk about a few positives before we get into the real work of wading into the issues. I'd like to celebrate 3 important strategic level successes we've achieved this quarter. Firstly, the addition of the auction house functionality to the project has been a titanic win. To say that it's been well received by the customer base is really underselling it. It's a killer feature, which has greatly reduced or nearly eliminated the least appealing facet of the game, while allowing players to get back to the best parts, the dungeons. SDF, you and the team are to be commended on both its design and its implementation. I know you had some hiccups in its deployment, which required more than 1 patch, more than 1 rollback. Those are always painful, but the community sentiment for this feature is overwhelmingly positive. The community has found tremendous value in this feature, so the pain, to put it in gamer terms, worth. The second cause for celebration, I'm very happy to report the overall server and client performance is at long last good. The game is performant. The stutters, the desyncs, the optimization and contention issues, they've all been painstakingly hunted down and removed from production. Great work. The third success to celebrate here is the reorganization of your development and build processes to include the new test server environment. I know this required a great deal of highly detailed work from the development teams, but the potential for this new testing methodology, once fully realized, is expected to greatly improve the velocity and the quality of your outputs and greatly increase the satisfaction from within the player base. While you have technically, quote, checked the box, end quote, for getting this live, you've yet to fully embrace its potential from a philosophical perspective, nor have you effectively capitalized on the process's inherent ability to insulate and or energize the customer base. Don't worry, we're going to come back to this and talk about it a little bit more later. But I'd like to start by framing the conversation as I did in early Q1, in terms of time to market and urgency. Everyone within the sound of my voice knows the clock is ticking. In my January update, I discussed my primary concern at how vulnerable Dark and Darker is from a better funded, better resourced competitor setting their eyes on your innovations, aping your work, and beating you to market. This remains your greatest strategic threat and your greatest weakness. I know this to be true. I know you know this to be true. My question to you is this: why the hell are you not acting like it? In the past 3 months, you have released no new maps, no new character classes, and exactly one feature an average customer cares anything about in the form of the auction house. If we're being truly honest, we actually have one less map now than we did 3 months ago. Meanwhile, you've more than doubled the size of your investment in engineering, and to all outward appearances, you've spent that investment rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, tweaking things until they are in fact broken, and quixotically chasing this nebulous concept of character balance while burning significant dollars and community goodwill in the process. Now, in my day job, I'm surrounded by a large group of talented technical folks, software developers, architects, DBAs, no game developers per se, but regardless, I've taken every opportunity to bounce around this conversation with that team. My lead architect and engineers have pegged a budget and a timeline for how long it would take a theoretical competitor of average competency to produce an effective Dark and Darker clone. I'll summarize it quickly here, but it's not good news. The estimate sits at between 22 and 28 months on a budget of between $5 and $8 million US. The big swings in delivery time are a function of average team skill, resourcing levels, architectures, but most importantly, the factor you have to consider here is: when did your competition wake up and decide that competing with Iron Mace and Darker was a good idea? I'm not sure any of us can answer that question, but if I was a betting man, I'd put my money on Q1 2023, coming out of the successful playtests of Q4 2022, assuming that you had competition who were paying attention and that they are, in fact, at least as smart as ourselves. We should expect one or more real competitors to Dark and Darker between Q4 2024 and Q1 2025. Now, Terry, I assume you've given SDF and the team all the help that they've asked for. SDF, I assume that you have as many engineers working in the code base as it can reasonably or comfortably accommodate. Further, I believe that you're moving as fast as you can. But you must beat the clock. You simply must increase momentum. And that means looking at areas of investment and vectors of acceleration that are unconstrained by the limitations of the tools, the architecture, or the development team as a whole. Accepting that as a given, you only have one real option. Terry, you have to scale out the creative function at Iron Mace right now and over the next 12 months, inclusive of additional full-time resources, contractors, maybe even whole departments. This is the only lever available to you at this point, which is not constrained or blocked by dependencies on the core engineering team. You need to hire and contract additional artists, 3D animators, and level designers to dramatically improve your rate of delivery for your primary product pipeline. The content. This is the big C, content, to flush out the hard work you've already put into core systems. What are we talking about? What do I mean when I say content? I'm talking about new maps, I'm talking about new floors, and I'm talking about new classes. Maybe new cosmetics. I don't care much about those things, but I understand certain people do. It bears repeating. What do you need to be working on? It's new maps, new floors, new classes. Everything else is non-essential and by definition, a distraction. Let's talk about distractions for a minute. The number one problem you have from a public relations perspective is that Iron Mace appears to have no direction whatsoever. Communication with your customer base has not significantly improved in the last quarter. As a result, your thinking is poorly understood by us, your customers. Your decision-making process opaque. Your motives and motivations, inscrutable. SDF, your behavior as the lead engineer, the guy who's updating the community and who's pushing new builds to deployment, your behavior can best be described as erratic and at worst, manic. Your team has hopped from one work unit to the next, often spending valuable time retreading old ground while attempting to optimize around the very mistakes you last created in a seemingly arbitrary decision. The endless flip-flopping, the hasty, near knee-jerk reactions, alongside the lack of any visibility to data or reasoning which drive these decisions, it's the central cause of the perception that Iron Mace is stuck in this dance, this one step forward, two steps back. Now, don't get me wrong. SDF, you may very well be a creative genius. I want to give that genius all the latitude in the world to innovate, create, and experiment all the time you need to cook. But what you're doing right now is experimenting on customers without their consent. You are disrespecting your customers and their time. And you collectively and outwardly seem befuddled that it's costing you players, community goodwill, and most importantly, it's costing Iron Mace a very limited runway. Your perspective around change management is flawed. You are hurting the player base and the prospects overall for Iron Mace's continued success. The test server is where we, the players, go to consent, to volunteer to be in the experiment. We accept that by going to the test server, we'll have a myriad of interactions. We could run into a potentially broken build, possibly janky stuff, but also maybe an innovative and fresh interaction with your current batch of new content. We go in with the clear expectation that regardless of what we find, the choice and the consequences belong to us. It is inherently an opt-in scenario. Now, multiclassing is a very large strategic misstep. The premise and its design are flawed and ultimately ruinous to the long-term health of this game. We won't go into detail on that here. I'll put a link to another video on that subject in the description below. What I want to discuss here is the decision to launch it on the test server. It was extremely wise. The decision to rush it on live servers after a handful of days, extremely foolish. That decision has needlessly divided the community right down the middle, with those who appreciate the new system and those who don't. And those who do not appreciate the system are given no recourse, no options, but to not play your game, to not participate in the test. The majority of its most ardent supporters, they like it, with caveats, noting things that must be changed, restricted, or rebalanced for it to really work. If you were to poll 100 supporters of the multi-class changes, you'll get back 100 different suggestions about how it could be improved. But all of them will tell the very same story about why they like it and what they like about it. You see, they were getting bored, and it's something fresh to play with while they wait for new content. You could have left this on the test server and learned just as much as you have now. You could have brought more players onto the test server by either removing the ridiculous barriers to entry you yourselves put into place, or worst case scenario, you could have incentivized the behavior that you wanted to see and test. Gentlemen, I want to leave you with this. The idea, the concept that is Dark and Darker. It's brilliant. You've caught lightning in a bottle. It's obvious to everyone. This intersection of extraction looter set against the backdrop of swords and sorcery, it's pure magic. This thing you've created is valuable. In the next 2 or potentially 3 quarters, the ripoff artists and their copycats will be here in force, and their Dark and Darker clones will be available on Steam to boot. But before that happens, something else is likely to happen. You see, This thing that you've created is too valuable to allow you to fail. Your investors, your board of directors, they will see you struggling and they will want to help. It won't be long before you're sitting across the boardroom table from someone with my skill set. They will be less invested in this project than I am, certainly. They will be less impressed with all of your work individually. But their singleness of purpose will be identical to my own, to make sure that this game is the best version of itself. The big difference here is that my advice is free, and theirs will be very, very costly. Best case scenario, their findings will only cost you additional investor oversight and a loss of agency and positional authority. And that essentially ends my sermon for today. I cannot tell you how distasteful it is for me to make this kind of video. I absolutely hate it. I hate that there's a certain segment of the population that's rooting for you to fail and enjoys hate watching videos that are critical of what I consider to be your good work. But I hate all of these things less than I hate the idea of the best product not winning. Gentlemen, you have the opportunity to do that. Now, for those of you who have stuck around this long, I hope you appreciate my point of view. I hope I've gone into the appropriate level of detail. I hope I've avoided speaking too technically or in too much corporate speak. And most of all, I hope that my mouse jittering did not cause anyone any undue nausea. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. Until next time, Koopa out.
You ever been in love, Hornbeck?
Only with the sound of my own words, thank God.
Like staff salaries and animal care expense, Alveus pays for that.